would like to introduce Ronda Green now. She's Chair of Wildlife Tourism Australia, eminently qualified with Bachelor of Science Honours and PhD, and she's been involved in a lot of conferences, workshops around Australia and through the Southeast Asian area, and authored and co-authored a number of books on wildlife tourism, particularly, and she actually operates ecotourism business, Araucaria Eco-tours. So what you're getting here is a very effective blend of incisive academic knowledge and practical field experience about what works and what needs to happen. So if I just hand you over to Rhonda, and if we load it up here.
Oh, yeah, it's all right.
You're right, you're ready to go.
Well, while we're getting that, I'll just talk about ecotourism because it is being used so wrongly. You know, what they're talking about as ecotourism, if tourism is damaging the environment in any way, it is not ecotourism. Now, Hector Ceballos was the Mexican architect who first coined the term ecotourism, defined it as nature-based, contributing to conservation, contributing to the local community, and educational in the sense that, you know, you don't just put names to things, but enhancing the appreciation and understanding of nature. He's been very disappointed that people in his own country have misinterpreted it. Oh, we don't want to get out of that one. And so, yeah, okay, thanks. That happens here too. Now, we've been talking a little bit about our former Premier, who happened to sit next to me at the first Destination Q big tourism conference they called. I didn't choose to sit next to him, it just I happened to have a vacant seat next to me. And, anyway, this was the ecotourism section, and I put up my hand and said to him and to the rest of the company, the audience, before we put in any of these new facilities and activities that he'd been talking about, we need to do some research. Where are the vulnerable species? Where are the vulnerable ecosystems? His response is, we don't have to do any research, we just start doing these things, then we find out what's sustainable. Well, if it's kangaroos and emus disappearing, we might notice. If it's a rare little frog, it's going to be gone before anyone even knew it was there in the first place, but he wouldn't care about that. Anyway, yeah, he then invited a number of tourism operators from the scenic rim to the Parliament House, and he was talking about making Queensland the ecotourism capital. And his tourism minister, Jan Stuckey, was also talking about this. And one of the things he said was, oh, we know we're on the right track because all the greenies are against us. And then he waited for some applause, but that applause didn't come, fortunately. And I went up to Jan Stuckey afterwards and said, look, as representing Wildlife Tourism Australia, myself and our secretary would like to talk to you. We'd like to come and talk to you about sustainability in tourism. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, no, that's for the Environment Minister. And I said, look, yeah, but I'm talking about tourism. We want tourism in the national parks. I'm representing a number of tour operators. We want to take groups of people looking for birds and so on, but we want it to be sustainable. And she still said, sorry, I can't talk about sustainability. I'm only allowed to talk about tourism. So I sent her an email later asking, when did sustainability drop out of the definition of ecotourism? Never got a response to that, but I ended up writing about that in the International Journal of Hospitality and Tourism. Anyway, yeah, so I wanted a glass of champagne the day that Camp Newman got voted out, but I've been a little bit disappointed with the replacements. Okay, so we have a wonderful planet. As a kid, I could never understand why so many people are bored with life. You know, it's an incredible planet. You know, and we want to share the wonders with others, so as many as possible will enjoy them and care about them. This is why I got into wildlife tourism. I'm basically a research ecologist, but I got into wildlife tourism to try and get this across. But while sharing it, we need to do so carefully if we are to protect the wonders of the natural world. Now, this is from the Centre for Biodiversity International, Our planet now faces a global extinction crisis never witnessed by humankind. Scientists predict that more than 1 million species are on track for extinction in the next few decades. And biodiversity doesn't just mean kangaroos and koalas. You know, I've heard people say, well, okay, it doesn't mean, you know, the development over there must be okay, there's still kangaroos hopping around. It includes, well, most of biodiversity is insects, actually. The butterflies, the dragonflies, and so on. Yeah, I've shown here one of the Gondwana-related, so I'm pointing to that, which doesn't make any sense. That's one of the Gondwana snails, scenic green is the highest concentration of diversity of the snails whose ancestors came from Gondwana around the north. Yeah, biodiversity means all creatures. It means the ecological processes. I've shown the wampu fruit dove there eating some bangalow fruits and dispersing the seeds. And need to preserve the connections between different habitats and preserve genetic diversity so we don't get too much inbreeding. Now, I'm going to have to go through this much faster than I originally thought, but yeah, we can get some wonderful experiences in national parks. Meditation, one of my guests on tour from, where was it, Tahiti, when we got to a little pool in the middle of the rainforest after walking for about half an hour. Oh, I just want to sit here and meditate for 10 minutes. Sure, that's great. I'd love more people to do that. So nature observation, you know, you can go riding, running, driving, camping, accommodation, either nearby or within. But they also provide protection of biodiversity, and this has to be their primary goal. So, yeah, private enterprise can just be taking a small group for a walk, or it can be something like what we just heard. Now, in Kruger, this works well to have some private enterprise within the national park. It's a little bit dangerous to go through by yourself, although I've done it 3 times, but driving myself through, with elephants, leopards and so on around. So it makes sense to have a rest camp surrounded by wildlife-proof fencing that you can stay in safely overnight, but also it's enormous. It's the size of Israel. Our national parks are nowhere near that size. So, yeah, the Convention on Biological Diversity sets a target, they set a target, 17% of our land area should be protected if we are going to preserve most biodiversity. Well now, IUCN says if we're really going to protect biodiversity, we need 30% protected. So Australia has, as a whole, met that 17%, which is great. It now has 19.75%. Queensland, our most diverse state, 8.24% of Queensland is protected by national parks. And wildlife tourism can be great, which is why I'm representing wildlife tourism, but it also can have some negative impacts which we must know about if we're going to avoid. And not all tourists, and even not all tour operators, are really knowledgeable about what effects they might cause if they're a bit careless. Some of them really don't care about conservation anyway, but even those that do don't always quite understand. And just bringing it into the natural habitat isn't enough. We had Hector Sebaius Lascuran talking to us the other day, a webinar that I ran through Wildlife Tourism Australia. Hector is the father of ecotourism. He is the Mexican architect who first developed the whole concept of ecotourism. And now, he's very upset that the term ecotourism is not used properly. So much that's called ecotourism is not eco at all. And he's coming out to Australia end of October, joining our conference, and he wants to set up a roundtable forum with some of our politicians and explain to them what ecotourism is. And yeah, that's all going to be very exciting. Anyway, some of the potential impacts. There are even eco-certified people running eco-accommodation that kill snakes, even kill frogs in toilets because people don't want to see them. It upsets the guests. And even if the snakes are just curled up under a rock somewhere, not harming anyone. And so there's deliberate killing. There's also increased roadkill. We've got all these vehicles going on the tracks. And when you're just clearing those trees, so many creeks. I've been a wildlife spotter while trees are being cleared for residential development. And I remember one day in particular, there were just a dozen big trees left. There were animals in every one of those trees. Some of them I was able to save, some not. There were squirrels, sugar gliders, possums with babies on the back. One I managed to race after, grab the baby, put on one's back before she went up a tree. Another one I wasn't able to, took the baby back to rear it. There were scaly-breasted lorikeets, nests of babies, native bees. There's a lot of direct killing, but then even if not, where's the habitat? What do they do afterwards? Those were the last few trees with hollows. Where are the survivors supposed to go? Anyway, if you disturb the understory, that's bad for so many of our small creatures. And I'll have to go through this pretty quickly. Disturbing the wildlife. As I said, most of our guests are really lovely people. The people that want to pay to see wildlife, really nice people. You get the occasional one though, like one big American guy that was on our tour. We were watching a lyrebird displaying, and that is something really, really special. And after watching it for a minute, this is close to the O'Reilly's retreat. He suddenly just charges straight in, flushes the bird deliberately so we can take a photo of it. Now that was bad for the bird, it was bad for the guests who were watching at the same time and wanted to keep watching the display. It was bad for the other guests later on, if that lyrebird could look at the display there again. And he said, I've only got 3 days to photograph all these Australian birds. And I felt like saying, who cares? But anyway, I'll have to go through a bit quickly. Feeding the wildlife brings up all sorts of problems, and it's okay, and maybe when you've got a messed up area anyway, or you weed or something and you throw a bit of lettuce to a wallaby, but not in the wilderness area, not in a national park. There's plenty of ways of providing. This is what I tried to get through at that conference that Campbell Newman called. I was trying to get through. There's so much opportunity on private land and leasehold land to take the pressure off the national parks. This is horse riding at Thunderbird next to the Tambourine Mountain National Park. Girraween Lodge, just next to Girraween National Park. It doesn't have to be in the National Park. You can walk from the lodge into the National Park. Even this treetop walk at O'Reilly's, that's not in the National Park. That's on O'Reilly's own land. And plenty of other public lands. That's Fingal, if anyone knows that, just on the northern New South Wales coast. Coochiemudlo Island, just out of Brisbane. Karawatha, in southern Brisbane suburbs. Wonderful places to take people. It doesn't have to happen in a national park. And now, I'm very pleased that a new grant has just come out. This new program, a new grant to develop ecotourism infrastructure adjacent to Queensland's national parks. Not within it, And this has worked very well before. If any of you know Binnaburra, these are some of the beautiful old historical cabins that used to be there before that horrible fire in 2019. But again, at the edge of the national park, you can walk directly from the cabin, or you could, straight into the national park. It didn't have to be in it. So, again, this is what I tried to get through to Campbell Newman and a few others. No, that's impossible to get through to him. Where are the vulnerable species? this is, any sort of new development. I'm not absolutely against any kind of development. Someone wants a composting toilet in the middle of a long walk so you don't have to go behind the bush. Okay, it blends in. And when I first heard about these huts in Kalula, I was expecting it was something like what I was saying to Greg before. I climbed Mount Kinabalu, the tallest mountain in Southeast Asia, quite a few years ago. I don't think I'm capable of doing it again. I'm aging like Mike. But there was a little cabin we carried in our backpacks. We carried our sleeping bags. We just laid them down in this little cabin, not right on top of the mountain. We spent the night. In the morning, we got up before dawn, and we climbed up to the top of the mountain to watch the sunrise, and that was wonderful. This is what I would have expected with something like Puna Lake. You stay in a little cabin at the edge of the national park. You're going to walk into, if it's a great walk, they don't have great walkers if they can't just walk into that. Anyway, you need to know what are the possible impacts on the vulnerable species, vulnerable impacts. Are there any seasonal needs? If they cut down a whole lot of trees to build a few cabins, maybe they're cutting down the trees that provide fruit in the winter, which is the leanest season, when the fruit pigeons and other birds that need the fruit need them. Has a really comprehensive fauna and flora survey being conducted in all the seasons. If they look for frogs and said there's no frogs here, did they just look in winter? Did they look on a dry night? Did they really look on wet evenings in early summer, where you might find a lot more frogs? What are the credentials of the assessors? We often don't know, and I've seen some terrible environmental impact assessment reports. And have the results been made public in time to do something about it? When Romerton Industrial Estate was being planned near Beaudesert, we were trying to point out to the Deputy Mayor of the time, we need to know now what the environmental impact assessments say, so that if they didn't do it adequately, we've got time to fill in the gaps. Oh no, you'll have all the information once it's all ready to go. Oh yeah, once the development's started, it's too late to do anything about it. And how will the tourism behaviour be controlled? I haven't heard much about plans for interpretation and training of the tourists that are going into these great walks as to how not to disturb the wildlife and so on. And is there potential for building next to the National Park? We've already mentioned that. Ecosystems are very complex. I won't go through all that because we are short on time, but we need to handle with care. The second aspect, since I'm representing Wildlife Tourism Australia, I've talked about the wildlife, now the tourism aspect. And what I mean by wilderness here, I'm not talking terra nullis, which I know a lot of Indigenous people very rightly object to. That is, the terra nullis idea is terrible. I'm talking about the National Geographic definition of wilderness as natural or close to natural areas without obvious signs of modern civilization. No big buildings, no major roads, anything like that. Now, this was when I was a young teenager, came up from Adelaide to Binnaburra, and you have to walk maybe 2 or 3 hours to get to Dave's Creek country. You're walking through the forest, through different kinds of forest, and then you arrive here. And I remember thinking, this is the first time in my life I've just stood totally surrounded by nature. Couldn't see any buildings, couldn't see any roads, and I felt absolutely wonderful. It really had a deep impression on me. And, we should be able to have these experiences. And just imagine just being there, just totally surrounded by nature. This is one place I take our tourists to, one of the waterfalls on Tamborine Mountain. To me, I don't mind those steps, they blend in. I don't even like that steel structure. If they painted it brown, painted it olive green, maybe to blend in. The idea of 10 cabins above Puna, well, and it is good to provide access to people, including the disabled. I've shown Mount French on the right there because there is a road to the top of Mount French. So we can take anyone up there in our tour vehicle and we can walk through the eucalypt, and then we're suddenly in heathland because of the underlying rock change. There's a dry rainforest that we pass on the way, and yeah, it's great. But I would not want a road on top of every mountain. We don't have to make everything equally accessible. Warren Benithan, he was from some posh family in South Australia. I heard him talk a few times when I was a student at Uni of Adelaide. This is a very approximate quote. I'm thinking back half a century, so I can't be sure that I'm absolutely accurate. But he said something like, if we make a road to every mountaintop, there'll be no challenges left, no wilderness. It'll be like mixing the finest champagne with the cheapest wine. Maybe everyone there can drink the mixture, but no one will ever be able to enjoy the champagne again. We need to have some of our wilderness areas still a challenge. And now, some of the questions from this point of view for the developments, any developments, can it be minimal? A small camouflaged hut hidden from view. So you're not walking through to this wonderful wilderness area and you suddenly see all the roofs above the trees or whatever. Yeah, hidden from view until you're right up close to it. Can all ratepayers stand a chance to experience the area? From what I understand, a lot of these new developments are going to be closed off. No public access anymore to these areas where the private developments are. Can it be built away from the most sensitive or secret spot? And some innovation to make it still feel special when you go into it, but not ruining the wilderness experience of the most scenic, most special spots, or the most biodiverse spots. And can something similar to be accomplished outside of the protected area? It can be adjacent to it, close by, but you can walk in from it. And are there some potential alternative incomes? I mean, they say, look, we've got to make money for the national parks, we've got to get all the... it reminds me of my honours supervisor said he remembered an atlas. All the wilderness areas were coloured in, and the key said, land for which no use has yet been discovered. Well, I think that's sort of Cameron, not just Cameron Newman, but various other politicians and developers, sort of their mindset. Oh, I've got to make some money from this. What I would like to make money for is for the conservation management. How else can we make money instead of putting up these elaborate things? So, can we find win-wins? Can we find other ways of making money? And that money that's coming from the huts, is that going to conservation management? I haven't really heard anything that encourages me to think it is. The protected area, can we find win-wins that we can somehow make money for conservation management? Our protected areas can continue to protect biodiversity, and we have opportunities for everyone to experience wilderness, but some sites remaining a challenge because they are so rugged and relatively inaccessible. Okay, thank you. With what? Cats. Oh yeah, we've got it here too. And actually something that I ran a conference in Tasmania, a wildlife tourism conference a few years ago on Cradle Mountain, which is absolutely wonderful. The roadkill was tremendous. Yes, someone said the way to see wildlife in Tasmania is with a glass bottom bus. And you've got the Three Capes problem down there too, haven't you? Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, I've heard about that. Yes, so the captain's of yes. Yeah. But yeah, and I hope it doesn't make a mistake and see a Tasmanian devil or a quail or something as a cat. Good. Yeah, I'd hear you on that, sure. Right. Yes.
What is your opinion of sacrificial areas that are allowed to be exploited for a period and then regenerated?
If it's not depends how much is sacrificed, and if it's not a very special sort of area, it makes sense to concentrate some kinds of activities in particular areas and keep those activities out of the others. But do you have a particular example in mind?
Yeah, Lorraine and I were both tour guides, volunteers for Expo 88 with Brisbane Forest Park, and they firmly followed the principle of three types of area within the park. There were sacrificial areas, which were supposedly regenerated over a 5 to 10 year period, so the sites were moved. There were public access areas, and there were restricted areas, such as one known as the scientific area, which only limited people, tour guides such as us, were allowed to take people into. And that seemed to be a fairly good balance to me, with allowing access to all sorts of people and restricting access to enable conservation.
Yes, there's been quite a lot written about that actually from countries all over the world. And, it does make sense as long as it is done properly by people who know what they're doing when they're sorting out the zonation. Oh, someone got right on the back.
Is there any currently in Australia that you would consider cabins that meet criteria for ecotourism?
Want me to repeat the question?
Well,
I just asked, is there anywhere currently in Australia that have cabins that meet the criteria for ecotourism, or in Queensland in particular?
Well, not within national parks. Actually, I was giving a lecture to Indonesian delegates a few years ago, and someone asked me, "Oh, can you put up accommodation inside a national park?" And I said, "Oh, not in Australia." Yeah, I hadn't heard about all this at that time. There's certainly, there's environmentally sound cabins. But not, I don't know of anything within, I'm just thinking, if something's already cleared, I'm not too fussed about O'Reilly's taking over a bit of national parks to put up safari tents, because that was already cleared lawn anyway, where people were camping, so they didn't have to really disrupt anything. And I think in one place I would like to see accommodation is inside Araucaria National Park. It's way out west, it's about 3/4 of the way to the Northern Territory border. It's a huge national park, and in the middle of it, close to the ranger station, it's cleared because it used to be a sheep station. There's a big wool shed, there's shearers' quarters, there's toilets and showers, and I think it would be an excellent idea to have sort of, bunkhouses, hostel type accommodation there. And I think it would be better when people are in the campground, they're tending to go behind the bush all the time during the night. They don't want to walk all the way to the toilet. And there are places where it could be done if it's done well. Oh, sorry, I think you were. No, actually, I was speaking to you before, so maybe you'll go there first. Yeah.
Not me. I probably need a microphone.
It's almost up to you. Oh, and the Araucaria hut, if anyone knew that, in a borough, that was in a little grassy clearing. They've taken that down now, but I wouldn't have minded if that had actually stayed there. It was a nice little spot for picnics and so on, and that was within the national park, but yeah, that didn't really affect anything. Yeah.
Thank you for a lovely presentation, very informative. It seems to me that one of the issues that national parks are bringing up is about getting more income for national parks, and it's very obvious that one way of doing that in Queensland is to raise campus fees. We have the lowest campus fees in Australia. We pay $6.75 a night to camp in a national park. I think in New South Wales it's $12 something. The government seems to be very reluctant to do that under the guise of we need to allow poor people to be able to camp. But I don't see any of those poor people having any issues with paying an $80 fee to get onto North Shore with their car. So I don't understand what is, raising the fee by $3 or $4 will bring a huge increase in income for a national park. And I don't know why we're not pushing for that instead of all those. And I was in the same presentation that Mike was in Rainbow Beach and Creek, and I saw the horrifying picture that Stacey, whatever, Rose, put on the board of all the parks that they plan to have eco-accommodation in. It's not just the original 3 that they flagged, it's just about every national park in Queensland with the 8.2% of parkland that we have.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why they're so reluctant to raise the fees.
Yeah, and we don't have entry fees into our national parks. New South Wales charges $6 or $7 just to go in there for the day to a lot of the national parks. We could have that. And for people living nearby, you could have people within a certain postcode that can get a cheap annual pass and they can go in as many times as they like. But have it, have an entry fee for everyone else. And there's been a bit of research on this too, in the tourism literature, that people are prepared to pay, and international visitors are prepared to pay extra if the money goes back into conservation, not if it just goes into the government in general.